Division between the UK and the rest of NATO allies continues. The British government are still sending money to our enemies, and we talk about why the mainstream media need to cover more stories affecting everyday lives in our country. Welcome to Disrupt. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the Ukraine Brief, where we disrupt the mainstream media's narrative, either the things that we don't talk about, or giving you their own angle. We are here to fix the spin of the mainstream media. First, let's talk about Zelensky, the latest update that we have. There's a lot of issues around the Western media, the Eastern media, about what's exactly happening on the ground, and everyone's covered it. We know, and everyone has their own biases, and everyone's trying to find out the truth, what's going on the ground, and whether Kremlin is telling the truth that, it's actually Ukraine doing it themselves, or Ukrainians saying that, we have evidence that the Russian army are actually destroying people's lives. That aside, I'm more concerned about the political effects that it has when it comes to the UK and our relationship with our so-called NATO allies and the European Union partners, because the PR game that Zelensky has started is quite strong. Let's be honest. He's a king of PR. He comes from entertainment, and his background was in that industry. And even now, as the leader of Ukraine, he's very good at communicating his message. And he's kind of basically right now the VAR of football when it comes to the clash between the EU and the UK. Because as you guys know, the left-wing media are trying to tell us that Britain and Boris Johnson are allies with the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin. That's the narrative. Even though we keep hearing from the intelligence that, actually Putin sees Boris Johnson as big of a threat, and Zelensky himself is now going around attacking Germany and France and all these other countries who are telling us that the EU are leading this movement, and he's actually praising Boris Johnson. First, let's go to the video that he announced that it released yesterday about his criticism of Germany and France historically.
Я запрошую пані Меркель, пана Саркозі відвідати Бучу і побачити, до чого за 14 років призвела політика поступок Росії. Побачити на власні очі закатованих українців і українок. Хочу, щоб мене зрозуміли правильно. Ми не звинувачуємо Захід, ми не звинувачуємо нікого, окрім конкретних російських військових, які скоїли це.
I mean, he's trying to be diplomatic, to an extent. But the whole point is the strategy of NATO and the EU allies over the last 10 years, at least 10, 15 years, has been quite problematic. And as he addressed, obviously was talking to Merkel and Sarkozy, those guys who were at the time leading Germany and France, showing them, you guys messed it up. And again, this is, of course, from his perspective. And you need the Ukrainian government's perspective. And of course, if you ask Putin, he would say something else. If you ask the opposition parties in Ukraine, they would say a completely different thing as well. But the whole point of it is that I don't really care at this point, as a British citizen, what side is actually doing whatever on the ground, because we're not really getting the truth anyway. That's the reality. I'm more concerned about the future and where we are and where we stand as a country. What's our relationship inside this NATO umbrella and the European Union? Because whilst the EU keep attacking us, saying that you guys are not doing anything, or the media who are pro-EU, Zelensky is praising Boris Johnson.
Говорив також із прем'єр-міністром Британії Борисом Джонсоном. Предметно, приємно домовились про нову оборонну підтримку для України. Новий пакет, дуже відчутна підтримка. Також про посилення санкцій проти Росії дуже відчутно. Погодили спільні кроки для досягнення миру. Вдячний Борису за лідерство, історичне лідерство.
When you think about it this way, it's actually intentionally or unintentionally, I'm sure it's unintentional, I guess. Zelensky is actually causing this division, because every time he comes out and praises Boris Johnson and attacks the rest of NATO, it provokes all sides. You have Biden getting closer to the European Union. You have Germany and France kicking off and not really talking to us, because they say, you and Poland are doing your own stuff with Ukraine. We want to take all the credit. So I have a feeling at this point is Zelensky, every time he releases a video, he creates more division, and then between the EU and the UK government. And this is quite fascinating considering the British government are not really anti-NATO, as you guys know. They're part of the top team of NATO. And we saw the NATO flag flying in governmental buildings yesterday, over the last couple of days actually, with all the ceremonies and everything else going on. And this is quite weird because I don't really like having a flag on top of our governmental buildings that is not our own flag. I wasn't even in favor of the EU flags being on top of any sort of governmental building. It should be just the Union flag. And this is, everyone has their own opinion, but I have a bigger problem. It's not just symbolic flags. I don't really care about that as much as the fact that there is this motion in the United Nations. Countries voted on Ukraine, and the countries that voted against it in terms of the NATO motion were your normal countries that would of course be on Russia's side. You got Syria, North Korea, Belarus, and then all the others who are abstaining, your Chinas and your Irans, who try to be like, well, we're not getting involved. Are you sure about that? You are already involved. The same goes both sides, by the way. We are giving them a lot of money in the name of foreign aid. We're still giving over 53 million pounds to Syria. We're not giving anything to Russia, so that at least that's consistent. That makes sense. 15,000 pounds in North Korea. I'm not really sure what's going on there. But my biggest problem is the list of abstentions. Look at this. You got China, you got Iran, India. We are giving, okay, for example, Iran. China, you could say on paper, we are still business partners with China, which is really sad, right? So we're giving 12 million pounds to China in foreign aid. Iran, a direct enemy, 151,000 pounds, almost 152,000 pounds. It's not a lot of money, but it's not about that. It's the principle, right? So there's a lot of outrage, but I understand the strategy and tactics of the Foreign Office historically, why they give these money sometimes to these weird countries. And I'm going to go to Peter Barnes, the political editor of the channel, to discuss this issue overall, because it's good to get some sort of clarity. To Peter Barnes, we know that there's a lot of discussions around foreign aid. Now that we're sending a lot of money to Ukraine, the United Nations having these votes against, obviously, about the whole kind of conflict. We have a list of countries that's been released who voted against or abstained when it comes to the motion to support Ukraine. And a lot of these people, we are already giving them money. So China is one of them, and so many other countries as well. My biggest issue is countries like Iran. That's a direct enemy. Because even China, we are technically business partners, but Iran, we're giving them £150,000 regularly. It's not big money, but it's the principle. What's your view on all this kind of chaos of foreign aid?
Yeah, I have to admit, I've never been the biggest fan of foreign aid, but I understand why it exists. Most of what we give to countries like Iran is basically money for them not to do things. We kind of say, here's loads of money, don't do something stupid. That is essentially the basis to which foreign aid was really conceived of. It was never really meant to be a kind of goodwill gesture. It's about soft power. It's about peddling influence in countries without having to have boots on the ground. That's the entire point of it. Yeah. And whilst I'm not a fan of giving money to country like Iran and and all those kind of countries, I have to admit it is one of those ones where you kind of have to put on your big boy pants and get over it a little bit. Like it is. I refuse. I don't think you own any big boy pants, do you? But no, in all seriousness, it is one of those things where it becomes the responsibility of a powerful nation like Britain to actually play its role in the international arena, and this is kind of how we do it. I do think we should start putting some more stricter boundaries on what the money should be spent on, and we should start making sure the money's actually going to things that we approve of and everything. That's one argument, but that's not an argument for not doing it entirely. And not doing it will probably cause more trouble than it's probably actually worth, to be honest.
Yeah, to be fair, I mean, there are a lot of issues right now when it comes to foreign policy and all this tribal stuff. You were out in Westminster yesterday, and we've been seeing flags of NATO on top of UK government buildings. What's going on there?
Well, yesterday marked the 75th anniversary since the founding of NATO. And I think given kind of everything that's going on with Ukraine, I think we're kind of seeing just how important it is. And I think it's kind of the British government's way of kind of saying like, no, we need to be a part of this. Right. Yeah. For a long time, defense issues and foreign policy issues never really scored highly on kind of the rankings of what the British public care about. So NATO is always seen as that, that thing that costs us a fortune and we never really got anything back from it. And I think now it's the kind of saying, well, actually, it is worth us being involved. But yeah, flying the flag is, sometimes a little bit controversial, but I'm willing to overlook it on this occasion, if I'm being honest.
Well, I mean, it is a governmental level of virtue signaling that the government started doing, so you're going to have to get used to it. This is the world we're living in. Thanks again, Peter Barnes, our political editor. I mean, I'm never going to be fully convinced, but I do understand the mentality behind it. I mean, I guess there's something to it, considering what we discussed earlier in the video about the division inside NATO and between us and the European Union. I guess the UK government, from their perspective, they don't want to be completely ousted, and they're being like, well, we are still the second leading partner. Unfortunately, America is still the leading partner in NATO, hence why we all have all these problems around the world. But this has been a 20th century and now 21st century problem. So maybe I understand from the British government's perspective. I still disagree. But I think the mainstream media should also focus on a lot of other issues at home. There are so many problems that we are not really covering. Every now and then, every day you have generic headlines about the cost of living. But if you notice, whether you watch BBC, Sky or any other channel, really, TV or radio, the cost of living debate is simply about party politics. They talk about it. They even bring ordinary people saying, this person from Yorkshire is having issues. And then they shift the debate towards blue or red. Boris Johnson, Keir Starmer. Who can fix the country? Can we stop relying on politicians to fix the country? It will be really, really helpful for the country and for the future to stop using party political matters into the actual real life problems. Because you have that problem where the media are not really discussing what could be done, and everything else is being completely missed. As we discussed on this channel earlier, the number of news stories that we have been covering, one is about the fisheries row, and Jacob Rees-Mogg, government minister, who's come out to directly, robustly attack the European Union for once. And I'm very proud, finally, that Jacob Rees-Mogg is coming back as his old self to actually discuss why it's the European Union's fault that's been betraying the Brexit agreement. That's one issue. Second thing that we covered on this channel, and again, you can find all these links in the description, is the Labour Party's Rachel Reeves, who's been very much anti-Westminster sleaze, or as she calls it, Tory sleaze. There's about £30,000 missing in donation from her side and her party, so she is also not fully innocent. But that's the hypocrisy that they're not really talking about in the mainstream media. And of course, let's not forget the other story that we covered today. Channel 4, meltdown, the lefties from your Channel 4 presenters and your BBC, ITV, and some of the talk radio and GB News people have been criticizing the privatization of Channel 4, because apparently if you are removing Channel 4, the burden of the state, and stop being under the control of the state, not the funding part of it, but the actual control, it means you are abolishing Channel 4. It means that you can't have all those shows that the metropolitan liberal elites love on that channel. According to Adilville, you can't even watch Paralympics anymore, even though it's not produced by Channel 4. It's just been broadcast by the channel, but this is the world we live in. Hopefully you enjoyed today's show. Leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts about the foreign aid issue that we discussed, but also what's going on with the NATO and the UK, because do you think that Zelensky releasing these videos are actually, ironically, dividing this family of nations and allies? Thanks again for watching. Subscribe to the channel. I'll be back with more news updates throughout the evening. I'm Tousi, and this was Disrupt.